Welcome back. Well, education is in the front burner this morning. We continue our focus on some of the sectors to see where are we, what are we doing at the moment, how far or close are we to some of these lofty objectives where we have them. We have two gentlemen joining us today. Dr. Sunday Audu is an associate professor of Department of Political Science and Public Admin, Babcock University, Ogun State. We also do have alongside him Dr. James Okoroma, who is an educationist and a public affairs analyst. Gentlemen, good morning, and thank you for joining us today on the program.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for having me.
Let me start with you, Dr. Okoroma. Well, we know education, as important as it is, I mean, we've seen, do we need any telling of how important that sector is at the moment? But then, from what you've seen, how we're going about some of these things, I mean, yes, ASU strike was big and still is in terms of how long students had to wait, what they've been grappling with over the years. We've got UBEC, we've got different strategies, so how we're trying to position ourselves educationally. You certainly know about these policies. So from what you've seen, how we're approaching these policies at the moment, what do you think?
Well, my brother, education is central to development. And if you want to define a country, if you want to assess a country, one of the first steps you have to take is to look at its education sector and its education policies. In the area of education, we haven't done well. Over the years, funding has been on a steady decline. Education, primarily, if I may start from this premise, education aims at developing the human person. There are three domains of learning: the cognitive domain, the psychomotor domain, and affective domain. You have to develop a rounded personality, all aspects of the human person, and prepare that person for the challenges of development. In Nigeria, we have not done well. If you look at funding, UNESCO recommends 26%. For any nation to develop, it must set aside 26% of its annual budget for education. Over the years, there have been funding gaps. We have continued to reduce the funds available for the education sector. If you go to our schools today, there are no facilities, infrastructure decay, poor motivation of lecturers, even the act of learning as a result of funding, as a result of poor policies of governments over the years. I know that this government has done some, recommendable things to get its education back on the front burner, but these things have not really worked. If you look at the budget, this year's budget, you will see that only 5.6% of the 3.08 trillion budget is devoted to education. I do not think that with poor funding, poor attention to education, poor motivation for university lecturers, poor infrastructure development in our universities and schools, I do not think that we are making serious progress in the area of education. Then you also look at the COVID-19 pandemic, which has dealt a very serious blow to education. Government can't fund education, is very clear. Today, you have over 50 million Nigerian children who have been forced to stay at home as a result of forced closure of schools nationwide. Already, we have between 12 and 13 million children who are out of the formal school system, and we're grappling with that. And you look at our population, the pressure on government to spend as a result of young people, more people demanding education, you see that funding has to be increased to enable the education sector move on. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Audu, I mean, you are in this sector. Do you remember the Chinese proverb which says, if you're planning for a year, sow rice. If you're planning for a decade, plant trees. But if you're planning for a lifetime, educate people. Being in the education sector, I mean, people enroll year on year, you could get the impression that, well, lots of people are getting education. Will that be a true representation of where we are if the country has that mindset? Or what do you think about, are we making progress or not?
Well, thank you very much. Now, borrowing a leaf from the previous speaker, you can see with the disturbing statistics we have of about 50 million children being out of school in Nigeria, and our inability to meet with the minimum benchmark set for educational budget. I'm not sure in Nigeria we've hit 11 or even 12% at any given time. Vis-a-vis the population of the country, it may seem like people are in school, but in the real sense of the word, not many people have access to education, and I may add to quality education. The quantity of schools should not be mistaken or be compared to the quality one finds in those schools. So it may seem that many people are going to school, but the question is the quality of the education they get in those educational institutions. Looking at the primary educational level, the secondary level, the private schools have really come into play to help at that level, both primary and secondary. Then at the tertiary level, you see private players also coming in. But given all in all, one may look at the quantity and say there are schools around, but the quality, and until we make this distinction, we will be reeling out statistics, figures of achievements, enrollments, but the real quality is not there. And so educating people for a lifetime or preparing for a lifetime actually has a connection, a very strong connection with the quality of education that people receive. And as citizens, what we have still leaves a very big gap, and the government must step up her act, beginning with budgetary allocation, adequate one. And once the citizenry is educated, most of the challenges we have in the country will be reduced, because the education will prepare the head, the heart, and the hand. And once the hand can walk, which is the psychomotor aspect, the heart is there, which is the affective, and the head, which is the cognitive. You see people applying their skills, whatever they have learned, to sustain their lives, to take care of themselves, with the government providing the enabling environment. So let's look at the quantity of schools we have, but let's look closer at the quality we find in those educational institutions.
Well, Dr. Audu, you may want to confirm those figures when you said that 50 million children are out of school. The official figures say it's about between 13 and 14 million, so maybe you want to confirm whether or not that's the exact thing you're talking about here.
In addition to that, I think the Minister of Education, while it was going through screening, I think in 2019, the Senate did say that 16 million children, so the figure now stands at 16 million, and he said that was based on the census. So that was from the minister.
Okay.
So those UNESCO figures, sometimes you look for official quote from here, but I don't think it's 50.
Okay.
So I'm not sure about 50.
Again, you may want to confirm that, Dr. Audu. But one of the things that gets to me in all of these conversations that we are having about education, especially, you know, from you being that you, as my colleague said, you operate in the system. Part of the policy, Nigeria's national policy on education, talks about functional education. And in the light of the fact that we hear employers say Nigerian graduates are unemployable because the certificates are there, but the applicability is neither here nor there. So do you want to speak to that? How come we have graduates who are, according to employers, unemployable?
Okay. Now, like I mentioned earlier, now that about the figures, the correction is duly noted. Like I mentioned earlier, we must have at the back of our minds the number of schools, the quantity put side by side with the quality of education we receive. It has been on the discussion, has been on about the curriculum we have, what we inherited, which we are not bold enough to really tackle head on. At the tertiary level, for example, universities should be given the leverage to package their programs to reflect the realities of the times. When you have a curriculum that is about 30, 40 years old, there are some things that have changed, really. There are basic fundamentals that remain, but there are other dynamics involved. So when you run a curriculum that is 30, 40 years old, in these times, definitely you are bound to find gaps. So the functionality of our degrees, even though we have certificates, is put to test and to question in most cases. That there is a disconnect between what we learned in class, which is mainly theoretical, that may not be necessarily applied to present day realities. So for our certificates to be relevant, for the graduates to be connected to the market, the needs of the market, the needs of the public must be considered. Could it be that there is need to go back to our curriculum? I think recently the NUC is taking a bold step towards that, giving a leverage that the minimum benchmark in the academic provision of universities, the university should carry a larger portion of it by presenting and packaging things according to their needs. And so when we do that, we see our graduates coming out, they are employable. Now, it's true that in our various universities, the NUC has asked that entrepreneurship be included, but even at that, except in a few cases and examples, some of the universities, both private and a few public ones, you still see the graduates coming out with a basically theoretical knowledge with little ability to put it to practice, to the point that organizations that employ, they would need to induct, take the graduates for further training, 6 months, 9 months, as it may require, so they can have them work in the various relevant industries. So I think it has to do with the curriculum. The educationists will continue to debate on that. We need to rejig the curriculum to reflect the present realities.
Well, Dr. Koroma, I would revert to the question my colleague asked you the other time about Nigeria's national policy on education. I'm asking that specifically because, I mean, if we are to look at how we have fared in terms of education in Nigeria this year, clearly we haven't really, can we even say we went to school this year, given that we were in locked down for such a long time? So going back to the issue now, looking forward to the year 2021, review this year, okay, and looking forward to 2021. What are the things that we should be looking at? For instance, one of the main issues that we did not move forward in education as much as we ought to have this year was because, one, we didn't see the pandemic coming, and as a result, two, the technology that we could have fallen back on, we didn't have infrastructure with which to, continue it so that the students do not lose so many months at home doing next to nothing. So if you were to assess our performance in education as a country from that perspective, what would you have loved to see, and what should we do to step it up? I know you've talked about money. Let's leave that aside. Let's look at the function of what are the things that we're supposed to do.
First, let me make further clarifications on the figures I reeled out when I commenced. I said between 12 and 13 million children are out of the formal school system. Then those who have been forced to stay at home as a result of the forced closure of schools due to the COVID-19 pandemic are about 50 million. In 2020, we haven't done well, not primarily because of poor funding and poor policies, but the COVID-19 pandemic worsened the situation. in our educational system because nothing was actually achieved. Between February 2020 and now, schools have been closed. Schools in the private sector, private proprietors have been badly hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, look at education. Historically, the colonial masters initiated an educational policy aimed at producing clerks for the colonial bureaucracy. Now, society is moving forward. Technology is taking over, science and technology. Nations are advancing. So we have to also move the curriculum to a level where it can produce graduates or products who can face the challenges of the future. With the digital economy, nations are going digital. Education should also go digital. We must produce citizens who can face challenges in the job market. What we need to do is to deploy technology. I know that the Federal Ministry of Education, in collaboration with UNICEF, are doing something in that direction, like creating online and offline platforms to ensure that children study, whether in school or out of school. We have to expedite action, do more in that area, deploy technology, and ensure that online education is enhanced. We need to fund education properly. The 5.6% which we have given to education in this year's budget, you have 3.08 trillion. And only 5%, which is about 742.5 billion.
Expatiate something that you just mentioned.
It's not enough.
Just one moment, Dr. Koroma. Something that you said earlier, now when you said we need to deploy technology, if you can give us a little more, if you can give us some more specifics about what exactly you're talking about. We have quite a number of tiers of government. We operate a 6-3-3-4 system. We have primary, we have junior secondary, senior secondary, we have tertiary institution. Then we have adult education. So if you're talking about deploying technology, can you give us a few more specifics about that?
What I mean by deploying technology is giving education, using technology to offer education to the people. Since physical interaction between teachers and learners is no longer easy as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So we need to deploy technology, create online platforms. The Federal Ministry of Education is doing this, but it's not enough. The issue is, or the question is, how many Nigerians in the rural areas, in our 704 local government areas, how many of them in rural areas can afford Android phones? So we have to also look at this. As we deploy technology, we also have to find a way to reach the unreached, reach those who are in the rural areas. If you deploy technology, students can actually sit at home and learn, without having physical interaction with their teachers. That is very, very important. That is what I mean by deploying technology. Having online, correspondence. Even in the past, many people earn their degrees by correspondence. We can actually do the same, since physical interaction is no longer as possible as it used to be because of COVID-19. So we need to deploy technology. We need to look at power. It's a multifaceted thing.
Okay, well, Dr. Koroma, just one moment. Let me take that question up. Well, yes, let me take that question up with Dr. Audu, especially about deploying technology. Something a number of people have also said is that teaching people physically and teaching people online, they are completely different skill sets. So in terms of skill sets for the people, the instructors who are going to be teaching people online, first of all, you want to speak to that. How possible is it? How workable is it from your own experience as a tutor? And how do we deploy it, if you say that's a way to go in the event of the challenges that we're having right now?
Okay, let me first and foremost say that COVID-19 should not be the only motivation for us to deploy digital technology to. I think it's simply what brought for that. Uh, for example, we have the National Open University, which is about the largest university that adopts technology, or let's say distance learning, with about 80,000 students enrolled across West Africa. Now, universities need to really embrace this, and the government must support it. In our own experience as a private university, what happens is a training, several trainings. And now the willpower, the political will rather, to do it is very, very important. So as a tutor, we had to undergo training on how to handle the various platforms. For example, you have Edmodo, you have Google Meet, and several others. Of course, we are on Zoom right now. These are technologies or platforms that can be deployed for the educational sector. So training is the key word. People are trained and exposed to those skills. But I must just say something about what my colleague just said. The technology, the platform, the backbone. You see, in Nigeria, access is a problem. People in the rural area hardly have a very, very reliable network. And something has been thrown into the playground also, this linking of the national identification number with our SIMs. We are very thankful to the government for extending the deadline. But this singular act would have cut off so many Nigerians. So I do believe things will be worked out with policy considerations to see how this project can be carried through. But the point is that so many people need their mobile phones and lines to connect to their educational institutions for those that offer them. So in the course of the lockdown, coming from my experience, we ran the second semester to conclusion, administered exams. The first semester also came. There was a phased resumption of students, while at the same time online classes were going on. And that was done successfully. Even the graduation ceremony was done virtually, and it was very successful. So I think it's the political will of the government to ensure, jointly working what the UNICEF is doing with the Federal Ministry of Education, to ensure that the backbone, that is the technology needed to run these programs, is there, so that those at the local government level will have access. The 774 local governments, can we boast to say they are all connected? They are all connected. So it becomes a problem. So you train people to have the skills on how to do this, then let there be good access. And that cannot be provided by the people or the schools. That is where the government comes in to provide these facilities. Then after training teachers, the students at every level, from the primary to tertiary level, can also be trained to have the skills. And good enough, the young people of nowadays, they are technology savvy. You hardly teach them how to use these gadgets. They are able to use them. So I think when the government collaborates with the educational institutions by providing the enabling platform, the enabling environment, that is access to the internet, these technologies are able to be deployed so that quality education will be delivered to the people. Although there is a caveat, there is still need for contact no matter what. Those in the clinical sciences, you cannot do that virtually. Those in engineering that would need hands-on experience, you cannot do that virtually. But to a great extent, the application of these technologies to really help, and education will reach as many as possible, not only because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but because we are moving towards classrooms without walls. And that is the direction we'll be looking at, education of the future.
What kind of consideration is your institution, if you can talk about that, given to those in the classes in the realm of engineering and the likes, clinical sciences that you spoke about, in order to get them on board as well?
Okay, if you allow me to mention, in our institution, that is Babcock University, we don't have engineering, but we have others, a med lab, the medical school, those in the technology-related courses, computer engineering, and the rest of them. So arrangements are made for them to come on site, even the exams, because you take lectures online, but it's very important to be on site to take the final exams. So what we do in the case of COVID-19 is to have a phased resumption arrangement whereby they can take their lectures online, but when it comes to the practical aspects, they come on site here in the school. All measures are put in place to ensure their safety. That is through testing. Already, the university has a molecular lab licensed by and accredited by the NCDC to carry out tests. So adequate measures are put in place. Now, this may not be applicable to every other institution. This is where the government really needs, these things can work. These things can work. So in our university, the practical courses, the clinical, people come on site and a phased resumption arrangement is made so they can have hands-on experience. Like I said, these things cannot just be done virtually. Probably one day we do that as technology gives us the opportunity. But this is the current practice in my institution.
We'll go to break, but we'll return and get our concluding thoughts from both of you in a moment. Do stay with us.
Thanks for staying with us. Dr. Koroma, one thing also that one would wonder how we can go about in our country is to stem the tide of brain drain. It would seem like at every opportunity, the next thing anyone wants to do is to, as they say, check out. What can we do to stem that tide, especially in the education sector?
It is poor motivation that leads to brain drain. It is not only in the education sector. A similar thing is also happening in the health sector. If you motivate teachers, I have university lecturers who are my colleagues. I have professors who teach, who give lectures from their cars. Some of them do not have offices. When visitation panels are coming for accreditation, the university management will force non-academic staff to vacate their offices for professors to occupy those offices so that the visitation panels will see them in the offices. So we need to motivate lecturers, teachers at all levels, not just at the university level, from primary school to tertiary level. We need to motivate teachers. If you don't motivate teachers, the next thing is to leave the country, not just our teachers, doctors. Provide facilities in our universities, the required infrastructure. Look at their salaries. How much does the professor earn? Look at all the arguments over IPPIS. If you exclude CBN, NNPC, and FIRS from IPPIS, why can't you exclude the lecturers? Give them their earned allowances. Motivate them enough, because they're putting in a lot. My brother, unless we contribute to the advancement of education, the rest of the world will not consider us as their equals. Compare what lecturers earn abroad and what they earn here. Compare the facilities available in universities abroad with what you have here. Our laboratories are not equipped. There is no security, which is another dimension to the problems we have in the education sector. So if you motivate them properly, provide the facilities they need, allow them to enjoy their autonomy, university academic autonomy, they will stay. Give them the required, the tools they need to perform. If you don't do that, brain drain will continue, not just in the education sector, in the health sector, and in other sectors of the economy.
Take that same question to Dr. Audu. Beside that of the motivation, any other thing you can adduce to reasons for brain drain in the country?
Well, I think just like he said, basically, there are economic considerations. Now, motivation, that is basically the driving force, educational, economic considerations. Now, of course, there are, where you work, you must find satisfaction. There must be self-actualization, and the tools must be provided. Now, when you mix the absence of those things and you mix that with economic considerations, then you see that people have no choice. And surprisingly, except for the medical doctors or nurses that leave the shores of this country, from the academia, most of those who leave, I do not have statistics to support that, but from personal contacts and interactions, most of those who leave end up doing other jobs other than academic engagement. So you see, it's a loss of valuable human capital from the economy here. Now you go, there are universities in the US that whose professors are substantially Nigerian, hospitals whose medical personnel are substantially Nigerian. You go to South Africa, so not only the US or Europe, even in other parts of Africa, you go to Botswana, Zambia, and South Africa and other countries. So you see that the work environment is not conducive, but mix that with economic considerations. How do you imagine a medical doctor who spent so much to go through medical school, or a lawyer or an engineer who spends so much, an architect, now basically finding nothing to do within the country here? So he or she moves out to find other things to do. So besides the work environment, which should be motivating, the economic needs, even where there is a conducive work environment, you see that the pay is not commensurate to the effort. But you see, generally, this thing should be viewed holistically. The entire country needs to consider and reconsider so many other things. Why is it that when our students, say graduates, go out there, they excel at the postgraduate levels, they win awards and so forth? Now, the same students coming from a supposedly weak educational system. If we put in more, this comment is not to support the level we are in right now, but it's rather to encourage us that, the Hausa have saying that when God blesses you with good looks, enhance that by taking a good bath and trimming yourself very well. If our students can do so well, I think if we look inwards, we can as well be one of the greatest countries in the world. So a holistic view should be made of the entire Nigerian system economically, and then in the educational sector, which we are discussing right now, so that we can have valuable human capital remaining within the country to develop the economy. Because what we have, the brain drain, is actually human capital flight. So just like we have capital flight when multinationals take money out of these countries, same with brains that are going out. So these things should be given a holistic view so we can have a strong and virile country. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Audu, is that the reason? Because, many people believe, and you probably do as well, that universities are supposed to be the pots of ideas for any nation. They are where the nation is supposed to harvest ideas that will help national development in specific areas. So how significant is what you're talking about now in not getting those ideas that should have helped us to expedite national development the way we ought to have, according to what the policy on education says, and what the vision of the Ministry of Education is?
Okay, let me quickly say, if I if I understood you very well. I think there is a disconnect between the town and the gown. The educational institutions, my colleague just said, he spoke about the curriculum bequeathed us by the colonialists. Education, just training the head for people to be clerks, storekeepers, and moving files and documents around. There is a disconnect between industry needs and what happens in the educational institutions. Just let me give an example on the African continent here, not even outside. I visited Stellenbosch University in Cape Town, and what I learned there, you see, the universities in South Africa, their research is tailored towards the needs of the government. And for every paper published, every research carried out, every PhD defended, the findings, the recommendations are made available to the government, and the government uses it. In fact, to the point that, in the transportation sector, a train train engines were bought and they were sent to the universities, to the engineering department to assess the capacity of those train engines, how long they are going to run, what load they can carry, and how far before they will be, their full depreciation will occur. So these things they do, and they make recommendations to the government, and based on that, policy works with academic recommendations. In Nigeria, there is a great disconnect. The ivory tower is doing its thing, and the government is doing its thing. I think until we have a connection, you see, by now we should come up with a vaccine, at least try to come up with a vaccine for COVID-19. There are so many societal ills that we can work and collaborate with the government. So if you allow me to say, there is a great disconnect. There may be some areas of collaboration, but I think the government needs to look closer into the universities, because therein lies most of the solutions to the problems and challenges we have. And so it's a mutually beneficial relationship. When the government supports the ivory tower produces the kind of findings, research that will galvanize the government into action. And the government must be honest enough to adopt these recommendations. And in the long run, it will help to deepen the research endeavor in our universities. Mostly the research done is to publish and earn promotions. But when the government shows interest in what happens in the universities, research will go deeper, and the recommendations will inform how government formulates her policies. And then we begin to grow from that point. I think that is it.
Wait a minute. Does that then mean that the universities can change their focus to benefit society without government necessarily showing that interest?
Well, yeah. Now, it goes back to the regulatory authorities. Like I mentioned earlier, the NUC is working towards that positively by giving a free hand to the universities to mark for academic programs of the universities. And the universities can be creative, looking at their areas of need to develop. I believe the universities can work, but you see, the universities operate within a system, within a jurisdiction, and the government generally offers regulation. There is little the universities can do, even though there is much they can do. And from what we see now, with more encouragement and more support, the universities will do more. But they are doing well, but there is a limit to what they can do once the government is not supportive of their efforts.
Dr. Okoroma, going forward, if you can give us maybe one or two bullet points of what we can do, if you agree with Dr. Audu, about bridging that gap between the town and the gown.
Yeah, as he rightly pointed out, there is no synergy between the economy and the universities. The university, the gown and the town must collaborate for national development. There's no point producing graduates who are not employable. As we speak, there are job opportunities in the economy that we still can't find people who can handle them. So if the universities and the drivers in the economy can come together and with proper motivation from government creating the enabling environment, the regulatory agencies coming in to play their rules, the universities coming in, what we're talking about is national development. And all these partners must come together for us to make progress. There's no point producing people who cannot fit into the economy. So there has to be a synergy, there has to be connection between these partners. Then we also have to refocus the curriculum. As I stated earlier, the curriculum we had in the past was to produce clerks for the colonial bureaucracy. Now we're talking about a digital world, a digital economy. How do we refocus the curriculum to ensure that those we produce can actually fit into our plans for national development? We also need to produce people who can be international citizens, fit in. There are even jobs internationally that our people cannot compete for because of the poor training we give them. So that is very important. We need to refocus the curriculum. We need to create a synergy between the town and the gown so that we can produce people who can fit into the economy and help in developing our country. We need to motivate the trainers. We need to ensure that the facilities for training our children are available and are comparable with what is obtainable in other parts of the world. It is very discouraging when you go abroad, even in the West African sub-region, you see their system. Look at Ghana. Many Nigerians are now sending their children to even West African countries that are not as endowed as Nigeria to train their children. When we have the resources, we have everything, all we need is the political will and then the proper synergy for those who are in the educational system and those who are in the economy to come together. Then
we hear you. We need to anchor at that point. Mr. James Okoroma, an educationist, as well as Dr. Sunday Aldu, an associate professor of political science and public admin, Babcock University. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us today.